I'm Rita Santamaria. I'm the owner, founder of Champions School of Real Estate, and it is my pleasure to be with you to kick off this new wonderful year 2020 and to have our longtime friend and specialist, Dr. Jim Gaines, here from the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. I want to give a hello to most definitely our North Dallas Plano campus, Fort Worth, Austin Online, as well as the campus, and hello Kimberly, the president of our company, and Kurt Knobloch, the VP of our company that office out of our beautiful new Austin location. San Antonio, hello San Antonio, and as well we have our 3 campuses in Houston. The one I'm at right now is our Galleria campus. We have Houston North, and as you know, we're going to have a brand new location where we're relocating the 1960s school to Grand Parkway the end of June. And then we have our West Campus over near Katy, as well as online and live broadcast. So good morning to everyone. I think for our new people sitting in class right now, you couldn't pick a better time to change careers and to consider being either in real estate, a loan officer, an inspector, or an appraiser. And at Champions School of Real Estate, we do it all. We also make the delivery live streaming like today, or in the classroom, as many of you are sitting right now. And as well, we have correspondence courses. But our online courses are amazing in that they are so easy to do, great to take. Many of our customers do that for any of those particular disciplines as well as designation courses. So it's always fun, our pleasure, exciting to be able to bring Dr. Gaines in and have the chief economist at the Real Estate Center come and give us a kickoff to the new year. And his specialty is housing and development. This man has such an amazing Vita resume of all of what he has done for us as realtors, real estate licensees in the state of Texas. He started out as an associate professor, University of South Carolina, with his emphasis in real estate and finance.
Right.
And that's why when we get into the charts and graphs, I love it because you go into a little bit of the finance part and how that works, and I happen to love that part.
We're going to talk about that.
Good. And so then he moved on into the beautiful Houston area years back, and he in fact worked at the Rice Center in Urban Research, which we all are so familiar with Rice University, before Texas A&M Real Estate Center through the Mays Business School found Dr. Gaines and brought him on board. We all know him in Texas. We all love you in Texas. His schedule is like amazing. He will be so busy this year, especially the first quarter of the year. So, Dr. Gaines, I look at the recon, and I hope and believe you all are pulling up your recon and reading it, because it's not only about residential homes, it's about land development, it's about industrial,
Right.
It's about commercial, office buildings. I read mine, and from like Forney, Texas, with a multi-million-dollar new community of homes being built. I happen to know where Forney is.
Right.
To Conroe, Texas, where there is an 800,000 square foot distribution center that's going to be built. To all of our major metros, to Central Texas, to Temple, Texas. All I see is construction. So, from your perspective, we all like to guess what's going on in the world today that affects us in real estate.
Right.
But with your research and your wonderful charts and graphs that you have, I'm going to turn it over to you and bring us up to date. Look into your crystal ball. Let us know what's going on.
Well, my crystal ball, of course, on my desk at my office is an 8-ball, but it's one of those you shake it and look at. You think I'm joking? I'm not.
No, you really have
I
one.
really have one.
I
My
love
wife
it.
decided that's what I do. That's what I needed.
That's cute.
But we're looking at it, and it's actually really interesting when you get into the forecasting, when you get into trying to look ahead, and it's a guessing game. I mean, no matter how.
But you're a good guesser.
Well, we hope we have an educated guess. We try to look at all the data. We try to look at what all is going on. For those of you who are joining us or maybe new to the real estate industry, the Real Estate Center is at Texas A&M University. The Recon page that Rita just held up for you. The really good part about that, it's a online subscription that comes out bi-weekly. You get an email. You can read it at your own leisure. The price is right. It's free. All you have to do is just let us know your email address, and we send it to you. And what we do is we monitor all of the outlets around the state, all newspapers, journals, business journals, etc., announcements, and so on, and try to synthesize it.
That has to be hours with everything I see.
Oh, it is. And of course, we can't cover everything, but we try to hit the ones that we think will be the most interesting and around the state and give coverage. For those of you who don't know our website, it's recenter.tamu.edu, and I'm pointing this out to you here this morning because a lot of the information, a lot of the data that you'll see, you'll have access, incidentally, to this presentation through ChampionsLive, through the school. But if you want to go online, most all of the data that you're going to hear about is there. It's available and it's free. You just go and log in to the website. We have reports that we put together for all of the MSAs in the state and so forth. That's just my commercial for the Real Estate Center.
We need the commercial.
You need to know that the
valuable.
center exists because we are a resource for the real estate industry. And for anybody looking at real estate issues in the state of Texas, and we encourage you to come to our website and you will find a wealth of information and so on. So, with all of that, with the commercial behind you, let's talk about what we're looking at here. For those of you who aren't aware of it, of course, we're now 127 months into the longest economic expansion that we've had in the country in our history.
Remarkable.
It's absolutely remarkable. It's the longest that we've had. New record every month, and I'll jump to the case because there's been so much written and so much discussed here in the last 6 months, particularly about whether or not we're in a recession. Are we going into a recession? Are we going to have a recession in 2020? And the general gist of the answer is no, we're not. It doesn't look like it. Now, that's absent anything really remarkable or exceptional or unanticipated happening. As we all know, last week, the big unanticipated events around the world over in Iran and so forth, we don't know how that's going to play out. Nobody knows how that's going to play out yet and what economic repercussions it might have. But we'll just have to wait and see. But I can tell you that if you're in the real estate business and you're looking at the economy and so forth, and you're trying to figure out what's going on either currently or what's likely to happen in the near term, here are the 4 things that I would suggest you look at. Now, there are all kind of details within each one of the 4, but jobs and income. Demographics, basically call it people. And if you're in the real estate business, you're in the people business. And as long as we're having growth in our demographics and changes in demographics and so forth, the impact, you're going to hear a lot this coming year from everybody about how the millennials are going to now be buying houses, how the boomers are not selling their houses, which is a problem. I'm a boomer.
Why is that? Do you know?
We're aging in place.
Okay.
We're not moving as much as what was anticipated early on some years ago when everybody thought that the boomers were going to retire and then move and go somewhere else. Well, it isn't happening at the level that was expected. Also, right now with the shortage of inventory in the housing market, if a boomer wants to move, he has trouble finding what he's looking for.
Something that's even comparable.
That's comparable
and
at
it's
the
more
price.
money. Right.
And if he's refinanced his house, he's got less than 4% mortgage interest rate. So what does he want to give that up for?
Right.
So
Rates
so
are
it's
so good.
it's impacting. So it's holding up the millennials. And now I'll come back to that concept later.
Good.
But and in capital and money markets, you're just talking about the finance. I'm going to talk about interest rates.
Love
You can't ignore it. And then of course you always got to watch out what the government's doing, laws, regulatory changes, and so forth. And this is from the federal level all the way down, and maybe even more importantly, down to the very local level, not just city, county, but down to HOAs, which are effective government units
They
in
are.
many cases,
And
and enact rules or
important.
regulations or bylaw enactments, condominium associations and so forth, that affect what you can do with your real estate and then can affect the value of the real estate. So what we look for is what, when, why, how can any one or all of these things change that affect our future. Wrap up of 2019, and incidentally, it's really interesting because you'll hear me refer to this a little bit as we go along. We're not only ending a year, we're ending a decade. So we're out of the 20-teens, and now we're
That's
into the
true.
2020s.
We don't think about that,
So,
do we?
but it is a good thing to think about, and also think about it this way. 2010 was basically the first year of the beginning of the recovery out of the Great Recession. So the entire decade of the 20-teens was a recovery expansion
From
decade.
that housing crisis.
From the housing crisis, from the financial crisis, from the collapse that occurred in 2006, 7, 8, 9. Really, the recession really went on into 2010, although officially it ended in 09. Effectively, it really went on into 20. But 10 was sort of that beginning year. So if we look, and I have some other charts coming in a minute that'll show us a 10-year kind of picture of, and it's very, very good for Texas.
Are you
Texas
talking
had
about
an
10
extremely
years
good.
forward?
Well, I'll go a couple of years forward.
Okay. good.
Yeah, I predict 10 years forward because I don't have to be here 10 years from now to defend it.
He doesn't mean he's going anywhere.
I don't know whether I'll be here or not, but anyway,
He might be
we'll see.
retired.
But
Okay.
but we had good GDP growth. Incidentally, that 2.4% up there, that was the average of first 3 quarters. It's going to end the year. We don't have the fourth quarter numbers. That's reason, like a lot of the data that you'll see
Exactly.
here, it goes through either November or the third quarter. We don't have total year-end numbers yet, but we're going to be in that low twos, between 2.4% GDP growth, which is not outstanding, but it's acceptable. It's good. It's okay. And particularly for the size and complexity of our economy, maintaining a 3% growth rate is pretty tough. And almost undesirable because it gets things a little testy. Anyway, spending.
But it's good. It's
But
a good
what
rate.
I meant by spending up there, PCE is personal consumption expenditures. That's you and me and everybody else going out and spending 110% of what we make every year, and we're generally good patriotic citizens and do that. But that's what's maintaining the economy. Jobs, we're creating jobs, almost 180,000 a month. You can see the data there. I don't have to recite this all to you. Unemployment, almost historical low. Productivity has been modest. Hourly earnings, wages have not kept up with the pace of growth in a lot of the prices, particularly housing, as we'll see a little later on. Inflation, though, at least the official measures of inflation that the government uses and that the Federal Reserve watch have been very modest. Now, there are others who would claim that that's not true, that inflation has been more than that, but it's not been that part of a problem. And then industrial production, the ISM index just came out yesterday or the day before at 47.2. I did have a chance to update that one. The thing that I point out there is it's lower than what it was at this time last year.
Now, what does ISM stand for?
It's a supply managers, the Institute of Supply Managers. They do the data collection, so they call it the
Okay.
ISM production. It's an index. If it's above 50, it's good. If it's below 50, it's bad. Is the way it's a diffusion index. And last January, when we started 2019, it was up over 60. And this January, we're starting at 40. The production is down. And one of the report just came out this morning that, for example, Boeing is now going to cut back 737 MAX to 0. They're not going to build any more of them this year. And that's a big deal because they were each one, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. So it's a huge impact on the industrial production in terms of dollars amount. So you have those kind of things going on.
And don't we have a plant in Burleson or close to that?
There's the biggest hit is going to be up in Seattle and in Charleston, South Carolina. But yeah, let's see if I can hit the right button here. Here's the good news. The jobs, which are the vertical lines, are increasing. We're still creating jobs in the United States. You see the down blue arrows, that's where we had recessions. It's kind of common sense. When you have a recession, people lose their jobs. And in fact, it's vice versa. It's a chicken or the egg. Mm-hmm. People start losing their jobs and then we have recessions. The unemployment rate, you can see, is way down, 3.7%. That's the red line on there.
Right.
So here's on the jobs basis. Remember, I had the four things listed: jobs and income. And the jobs are really still doing quite well. What we'd look for is a turnover at that upper right-hand corner, and it isn't happening. It's still, the jobs report came out for December, was exceptionally good. So we're doing great.
I love that low red line going down there.
Let's see. Let me come back to here. I said we talk about interest rates, and people want to look at what interest rates are doing. And let me give you this chart first. The black line on here is the mortgage interest rate, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. And the green line is the federal funds rate. That's the rate you read about in the newspaper every time the Fed Open Market Committee meets. And they decide they're going to target a rate. And it's a short term, it's the interbank overnight lending rate. And then the blue line in there is the 10-year Treasury. That's the common sort of medium-term interest rate that a lot of things are measured against, particularly the mortgage interest rate. If you'll notice there, the black line and the blue line tend to move together. And in fact, if you want to know what the mortgage rate's going to be at any given time, if you knew what the 10-year rate was going to be, just add about 160, 170 basis points, and that's generally the mortgage rate.
Okay.
But what you'll see is that the Fed, you can see the stair-step increases that were going on,
Yes.
and then this past year there was 3 declines. So now that the upper bound of the Fed fund rate is about 1.75. It was really interesting because they were raising rates, but the long term, the blue line and the black line, the 10-year and the 30-year, were falling as the Fed was trying to raise rates. So we'll see. For the housing market, last January at this time, it was at 4.5%. Mortgage rates were at 4. Remember, fourth quarter of 18. Mm-hmm. We ended the year. The mortgage interest rates were approaching 5%, and most of the experts were predicting it was even going to go even up to about 5.5.
We discussed that.
And probably when I sat here, I hope we don't have it recorded of whatever I said last year.
You did. You said they were going up. No,
We thought all of the indicators were they were going up, and of course they did exactly the opposite, which will give you an indicator of how much you should listen to me this morning. If it does just the opposite, but we went down. We averaged a little under 4% for the year. The mortgage rates have not been moving in big magnitudes. We're talking tenths of a percent on the interest rate. The thing that's holding it up is inflation. That's the red line. If we superimpose the inflation rate and look at it, you can see that inflation coming down, and it's been holding kind of right around that 2% mark. Fairly consistently, and that's been holding down rates. Now, there's all kinds of things going on in the global capital market right now that we're all keeping our eyes on. Sovereign debt has gotten to be high. By sovereign debt, I'm talking about how much borrowing is going on around the world by the various governments. Everybody. Italy, France, Germany, Britain, the United States. I mean, the U.S. alone this past year had to borrow just a hair shy of $1 trillion to cover the deficit in our federal budget. That doesn't count what state and local was borrowing to fund infrastructure development and those kinds of things, and doesn't count around the world, particularly in Europe. and in Asia, the amount of borrowing that's been going on. So we'll have to see what is going to happen here. Corporate America has also been borrowing a lot of money because it's been so cheap. In fact,
There are a lot of people that are just aghast right now
Yes.
with that figure that we've heard before. But $1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
I mean,
and it'll be another $1 trillion this year. There's almost no way that the federal government can avoid another $1 trillion deficit this year. They won't get enough revenue to cover what they're spending. I mean, it's just that simple. It's just like budgeting in your household.
Exactly.
How much you spend, how much you take in,
the same problem we have
and
as
there,
general public.
it's going to happen again. And it's interesting, there's enough capital out there right now. And also, of course, the U.S. is the least risky country in the world. So if you have capital, where would you like to invest it? Incidentally, our 10-year cap rate at just a 10-year treasury rate there, at just a little less than 2%, it's like 1.8%. I can tell you the German 10-year rate is a negative 0.6. The Japanese 10-year rate is a negative 0. It's a negative. They're negative interest
Oh
rates.
my gosh.
So they're now
So-
you know, from a comparative standpoint, you could put your money in a safe 10-year U.S. Treasury,
Right.
get almost 2% yield, as compared to a negative yield on.
That one little statement right there is so, it's just worth so much.
Oh yeah, yeah, and quite frankly, economists and the financial markets have trouble. We're not real sure how to handle negative rates. When it first happened about 3 years ago in Europe for the first time, they had like a Y2K kind of crisis. The computer systems didn't know how to handle the negative rate
Oh my.
in the calculations of everything for the banks and so forth.
Yeah.
And you would say, well, why would anybody do it? Well, in most of the other countries, the banks are required to buy domestic bonds, government bonds, so they don't have a choice. They don't have the freedom of choice of just buying based on yield completely. So, and I'm oversimplifying that
No,
a great deal, but it's the way it
appreciate
works.
that. Our students appreciate
Yeah,
that.
the bottom line here from our standpoint, for all of us in real estate and looking at this, it is most likely that at least for this year, the projection on interest rates is they're not going to move much. Then in which
Good.
direction? We're not real sure of that either, but because it won't move much, the variation there won't really have
So
that
whether it's
significant
down or up,
of an impact.
it won't be much of an
Yeah.
impact.
So your buyers, if you're working with buyers or sellers out there, they should anticipate that this year is still going to be a very attractive year in terms of the interest rate that they're going to face trying to get their mortgage money.
Well, that's good news number one.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's turn to Texas a little bit. I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to read this. This is, a lot of people like the high level detail to know by industry group what is going on in the state. We're adding about 30,000 jobs a month. We're adding about 360,000 jobs a year. And incidentally, 2019 is going to end the year right at about 360. You can see up there at the very top line, the absolute change from November to November was 336.7. So when you put in
Appreciable.
December in there, it's going to be, in fact, it'll probably be a
Oh,
little
my
better than
goodness.
360,000, about a 2%, 2.7%, 2.8% growth rate. The U.S. rate, by comparison, is more like about 1.6, 1.7. So we're still outpacing the U.S. A couple of things. Our mining and logging is down. What you'll see is that year over year, we're only a difference of 100 jobs, 0%. The energy industry and the mining and logging, that's where you find the oil field service, oil production, the drilling and all of that. That's that
I
category.
asked you that last year.
That's the category that it fits into.
Okay.
And what we're seeing there and what we anticipated this past year and are seeing so far this year is sort of a neutral impact. It's not up or down. The good news is, look at construction is up 56,000 jobs. You were mentioning that in your opening
All
remarks.
over the state.
It's all over the state, and that's total construction. That's residential and non-residential. And despite that, we still have a labor shortage. We could be doing even more, but particularly in the residential section. We're still not going to build enough single family. We could build almost 25% more houses than what we're going to do this year.
That's incredible.
Based on
because
demand.
we move it to exactly that, supply and demand.
Right.
Demand is going to stay high.
The demand would be there, but the supply is not going to be able to keep pace. Labor shortage, people, particularly the subcontractors finding the trades, the electricians, the plumbers, the masons, et
That's why all
cetera.
of these trade schools are popping up everywhere.
Exactly so. And there's a shortage. And then also we have a problem of lot inventory and land. Land in Texas, one of the advantages Texas has always had in our residential market is we were very competitive, low-cost housing market. We still really are a low-cost housing market, but it's changing and our costs are coming up. One of the reasons we were historically low cost is as everybody will tell you, in Texas we got lots of land, and it was historically relatively inexpensive. And we didn't have an overlay of regulations and controls and so forth that added to the cost of development. In fact, just the opposite. Because of the ease of regulations and so forth, the timing, you could buy a piece of raw land
And build much faster.
and build within a year. You were building a house. Well, go to California or go to New York or go to Florida and try to do that. You're looking at 6, 7, 8, 9 years between the time you buy the raw land and you're actually building a house. And not to mention, it's just the time alone is a cost. Everybody knows time is a cost. Not to mention the actual fees and direct costs and so forth. We're starting to see more of that in Texas, and it's slowing us down a little bit.
We saw that
relatively
with
speaking.
our own building on the Grand Parkway.
There you go.
There were so many other agencies that got involved, we had no idea.
Yeah, and
And yet at that, it's still going to be open within a year.
well, we still kind of try to overcome those things, but it's there. I just wanted to point out some of these things that are going on. You'll notice there's only one industry group. It's information. The newspapers, the print media, and so forth lost jobs. It wasn't substantial. It's a relatively small proportion of total employment anyway. But you'll see professional and business services way up, education, health services way up, leisure and hospitality way up. Those are some of the big gainers. We are a service based economy. You'll see the services provided there sort of about a third of the way down, 268,000 jobs versus 77,000 in what's called goods producing, which is the mining, logging, construction. And in manufacturing, our manufacturing sector has held up pretty well this year. And a lot of our manufacturing is tied to oil and gas. So it's interesting that we've maintained a 2.4% growth rate in the manufacturing employment there. That's more detailed than you'll probably ever want to see in your life, but it's kind of interesting. Here's what it looks like in a 5-year projection. I wouldn't give you 10 years, but I'll give you 5.
Okay.
We're looking for job growth to probably average something like 2.1% a year for the next 5 years, and we're going to beat that in 19 is included in the forecast year because it's technically not over. We don't have the numbers yet.
So right now, my experienced agents are looking at those orange graphs going, yes, yes, yes,
Yes, ma'am.
yes.
Yes,
Up,
ma'am.
up.
Because
Thank you for being here today with the orange graph.
well, the two things that are going to drive our home sales is going to be more people and those people having jobs with income to be able to afford to buy a house. Those are the two critical elements. They're the jobs. The jobs are going to be created. And the reason I gave you all that detail on the chart before, those were good paying jobs. A lot of these areas that we were looking at over there in that column where you're looking at the absolute change, I was just looking at absolute instead of the percentages, but construction is good paying, manufacturing is high paying, professional and business services relatively high paying, education and healthcare. Now the leisure and hospitality is actually one of the lower paying. That's the restaurant and hotel workers and so on.
Okay.
But you'll see that happens. So we're looking, and that's about the same pace of growth that we've had the last 5 years. We grew at about 2.15 we're projecting about 2.1. It's essentially the same rate of
I
growth
was looking
in
at
jobs.
that at about 2015. We kind of started going that same.
Well, and 2015 and particularly 2016 and 17 were difficult years because that was when the oil prices fell. And particularly here in
Okay.
Houston, we had a downturn. It was a downturn statewide. It sort of flattened. So we had a little bit of a flat period there for a couple of years, but we were so good in 14 and 15 and then picked back up in 18. So it looks pretty good. I mentioned we ended the decade. Here's how we look from 2010 to 2018, which is most of the decade, and how Texas stacked up in terms of employment growth. And what you see there, the actual number of jobs added, the 2,128,000 in Texas, was second only to California. California did add about 2.9 million jobs. We added about 2.12. So, and you can see the percentages, and that's how I happen to rank order these bars.
I remember that was the same when you were here last year, talking about the end of 2018.
Right?
California number 1, Texas 4.
Yep. And those are the big three states, because look at the big drop off. When you go to Washington, Arizona, and I threw in Virginia, which is the Washington, D.C., or a good bit of the Washington, D.C. area, you can see the fall off is very quick in terms of the sheer numbers of jobs
It's
being
huge.
created. And in real estate circles, in economics, we look at the percent rate of change, but in real estate analysis, I look at those numbers. I want to see 2 million jobs plus a year being created, because what it'll tell me is 2 million jobs will support 2 million households. And households
And we
demand
love
housing.
that. Yes, we love that. Do you want to repeat that again?
Well, it doesn't. The statistics don't work
We know
exactly
it, but
that
it
way. But in
works.
simple, because obviously you have double income and double job families,
Uh-huh.
so you can't make a 1-to-1. 2 million jobs, 2 million households. It's actually less than that. It's 2 million jobs to about 1.6 million
But
households.
we'll take
But
that.
but it's still, that's the driver. And when you're creating the jobs, you're attracting the population. We've all seen that here the last 10 years. And I've got a similar chart here in a minute for population. That creating those jobs creates the magnet to create people to come to the state and live
But you
here.
know, I look at California versus Texas, and then I'm also comparing what it costs for the same square footage of a home
Oh.
in California compared to Texas, and we know why people move to
Right.
Texas.
Right. Oh yeah. And California, like Texas, is regional. There's the coastal area of California, which most people think of, where your average price per square foot is probably north of $350 a square foot, and in San Francisco it's close to $1,000 a square foot. But the central part of the state
Uh-huh.
is kind of like Texas.
Okay.
So there's you have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. Anyway, I thought you'd be here's the actual projection of what we're looking at for the end of 19 and then for next year for 2020. We got a little nervous about doing 2021 yet, because one of the other things that's on the horizon here for 2020 is something called a presidential election, and that's going to affect the 2021 projections. And so you have to almost do 2 or 3 sets of projections. But what you see is it's basically we're still doing great. Dallas probably slows down just a little bit. Austin slows down a little bit, but quite frankly, they are slowing down from almost unsustainable rates. When these kinds of economies, particularly a Dallas and the Fort Worth area, but Dallas, 3.5% growth rate, job growth rate, very hard to sustain. 3% is still an outstanding rate of growth. About 2.5 statewide. San Antonio 2.5. Houston at about 2.4, and that may be conservative. One of the things that we've got there is we're anticipating not very much positive oomph from the oil and gas market.
Okay, so that's the difference.
That's
It's not
the
knowing
the
what
big
oil
difference.
and gas.
Yeah, oil and gas, and I'll show you that why we think that here in just a minute. Fort Worth. Back up, Fort Worth is more the manufacturing center and so forth. You were mentioning the logistics, the amount of square foot, the amount of industrial warehouse space that's been constructed in Texas in the last 10 years is phenomenal. Everybody last year got excited about the H2Q for Amazon
Right.
and going up to New
Uh-huh.
York and so on. Amazon's got something like close to 7 million square feet of warehouse space in Texas. We're not
is very
holding out.
appreciable.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a
It's
lot in
appreciable.
Houston, a lot in Dallas, so it's around.
And I look at Austin, and Austin, number of months availability of homes is just a little over 2 months.
Yeah, it's less than 2.5, which
That's
effectively is in Aggie speak.
Uh,
They ain't got none.
there you go.
ain't
That's
got
what
none.
we're saying. Yes, it's back on, but I like
Yeah,
the Aggie.
You like the Aggie
terminology.
speak on that,
Uh-huh.
right. We're finding that in a lot of the sub-markets around the state. You'll find it especially by price category. I'll show you here in a minute.
Okay.
The Dallas Federal Reserve, for those of you who like the Dallas Fed, they put out a leading economic index, and it's a fairly complicated thing. They use these 8 variables. You don't need to read it right now, but you can see how the leading index does tend to follow the trend. And what I would point out is the last year or so, it's been steady. It had a little dip in there. That dip out there is late 18 when the price of oil dipped. And it came back because, as you'll see, almost 3 out of the 8 measures that they use in this are oil and gas related. So it tends to be based on that. Speaking of which, here's what it looks like. The rig
my
count, which
word.
is the dark line, and the price of West Texas Intermediate crude. These are weekly prices in the orange line. What I pointed out here in the red box is that this time last year, on January 4th of last year, the price of oil was $47. We ended the year on December 20th, which was the last working day. They measured it at almost $61.
I was gonna say.
And the average for the year was 56.82. So if you look at it over the course, and incidentally, there was a lot less volatility once you see that little dip, or fairly substantial dip there at the end of 18 on the orange line. After that, it was fairly stable, and we're anticipating that it's going to kind of stay there at that $55 to $65 price. Now again, the impact of the events of last week, and Iran and the Middle East and retaliation and how we react and what the Saudis do and what the Iranians do and what the Iraqis do, all of that could impact all these numbers a lot, or they might not impact them very much at all. As many of us will remember, a few months ago there was a drone attack against the Saudi oil fields that took them, reduced their production for a while there. But the
Fires
price,
and everything.
the price was affected for about 3 days, and then after that it
That was
stabilized.
it.
So it didn't have the kind of dramatic impact
Uh-huh.
that people expected. Same thing Friday and yesterday. Price of oil went up a little bit, but it didn't go up dramatically. It went up a couple of bucks, $2 or $3. And the expectation is here for the rest of this week, after the market gets stabilized a little bit or steadier, it'll do. The one thing that is going to happen, the rig count is down, and that rig count is probably going to keep coming down a little bit more, mainly because the technology and the productivity of the wells that we're drilling now are so much greater than what they've been in the past. The fracking industry has now learned literally how to do it, and how to do it better, quicker, faster, cheaper. And so the productivity per well is so much higher, you just don't need to drill as many wells. And the way the technology of drilling is, you don't necessarily have to put up a rig, take it down, move it, put it back up, take it down, move it, as you did with the old conventional wells. Now they can just put them on a track and move them over about 20 feet and just drill another well. So
That is so interesting.
yeah, and I'm not the expert in that. We got
No,
interested
but
in
how you
that.
explained it, it makes sense.
It does.
So it doesn't look so negative.
It's the productivity per well, and I mean, we're talking dramatic differences. Back up there in 2014, where that black line is up near the top, up there was
Exactly.
over 9, and these are Texas rigs, incidentally, a little over 906. The average production was in the neighborhood of 70, 80, 90 barrels a day. The wells being drilled today out at the end of that line are now somewhere between 900 and 1,200 barrels a day. Big difference. You just don't need as many
Huge.
wells. You know, so the productivity, the know-how on the fracking. So that's, but what we're looking for here, and the key takeaway here, is that it looks like to us that the oil prices are going to more or less stabilize. And I say more or less, within $10 maybe, which still seems like a lot of variability, but oil prices do tend to move on a almost hourly basis. The rig count is going to come down, and that's some of that employment that doesn't happen now. We are not going to see the Halliburtons and the Schlumbergers and the other major oil field servicers and the E&P companies. There's a lot of merger and acquisition going on in the E&P field, so we're just not going to see the job creation there. So we're looking for that to be neutral, not a negative, but not the big positive that it's been in the past. We'll have to see how it goes. Here, I told you I was going to show you about the 10 years. I mean, we added almost 4 million people to the state's population, and I haven't even included 2019 yet. So it'll be over 4 million people. We've added almost 2.4 million jobs. So by the end of 2019, when we add it all up, for the 10 years, 2010 to 2019 inclusive, it'll be about 2.5 million jobs. What we're looking at the next 5 years, and I gave you an indicator of that a little earlier, about 1.2 million jobs, and probably close to another 2.5 million people. Well, real estate people, there's your two things, jobs and people.
Jobs and people. And when you worry about, when the seller or buyer says, well, is it a good time to buy? Is it a good time to sell?
Right.
And I always suggest, instead of your opinion, just have what they're going to get. Everyone that signed up for this, they're going to get the link to
Yes.
your charts and graphs. And pull it up and show what the research center, the real estate center has put together.
Right. I mean, it's real.
It
This
says
is
volumes.
fundamental.
It says volumes.
Yeah, and this is not a fancy analysis at all.
It's very
It's
understandable.
just the basic raw numbers. Last year we added about 380,000 people in 2018. You see the 379 down there, and I can tell you that about 50% of that was our natural increase. That was births over deaths. And that's interesting because what's going on, there's a big movement in the demographic field right now. Our birth rate is declining just across the board. Even for the ethnic groups and the Hispanic and Asian and so forth, who traditionally have had very high birth rates, those birth rates are declining significantly. The Anglo birth rate is virtually below replacement. And so if we project it out long enough, we all go extinct. But
I love your sense of humor.
but the good news that I'm happy to report is that one of the reasons that natural growth is that the death rate is down because us older people are living longer.
We're living longer.
And so the net there is still a bigger positive. The other side of the coin, and a lot of people in Texas don't know this, the other half of our population growth is immigration, both domestic, i.e. people coming from other states, and then foreign, of course, people coming from other countries. It's about 55-45 more foreign immigration than state immigration. We actually bring in more people to Texas from out of the country than we do from out of the state.
That is really informative.
That-
I
that-
had no idea.
Yeah, because we always hear
That's
and talk
huge.
about all the Californians
We
and the
think
New
they're
Yorkers and
moving
the
from around the United
from
States.
around the states coming here because we focus on that. We hear about
We
it so
do.
much. But it's still, at the end of the day, when you add up all of the numbers, the foreign immigration was actually higher, greater
Surpasses.
than the domestic, what's called the domestic.
Domestic.
We get the most people from California. We also send the most people to California because there are people who do, for whatever reason of idiocy or whatever, leave Texas. And
We have no
I'm
idea
kidding.
why.
Yeah, no. Jobs, there's all kind of reasons. But,
Sure.
so it's interesting, but the net is still positive coming in. The only one I think that we have a net negative with is Oklahoma. We send more people to Oklahoma than we get from Oklahoma.
Okay.
if I recall the data correctly. Which leads us to the demographics. Here I told you the 10-year slide. Texas far and away around the country. I mean, this is the top 10 states in the country by population growth, and you can see we are, at 3.5 million people through 2018, far and away, and 13.7% growth rate for starting from the fact that we're the second most populous state in the union in the first place, with a very big base. That is a phenomenal growth rate. Florida doing extremely well. Now, I mean, Texas, Florida, California, good and well, those are the top 3 states in the union right now that are doing almost anything, because this is the actual drop-off. It goes from California's 2.2 down to North Carolina at less than 1 million.
That's
And
huge.
North Carolina and Georgia have been having phenomenal growth. Virginia and South Carolina the same. Arizona and Colorado the same. And Washington up in the Seattle area has
And
been
yet
notorious.
the difference between
But look at the
California and
differences.
going down,
Yeah.
or most definitely Texas and Florida.
And you can see
California.
California's rate of increase is among the lowest on a percentage basis, because they've
You're
just got
right.
such a big base to start with. Another 2.2 million people wasn't that much on a percentage basis of their existing stock.
That's a beautiful graph. 13.7% growth
Yeah.
population.
I had a chance to put that together and present it in Washington, D.C. in early December at a NAR conference, where they asked us to compare the states, and so we
Perfect.
put that together. Here's what's going on in Texas. This is the population change over, this last decade by county. One of the things that people have to realize and get a handle on, both in Texas and out of Texas, it's not universal growth. We had 96 counties that lost population between 2010 and 2018, the counties in the red. And it's not too hard. I mean, you can see the two extremes. On the far right, you can see people don't want to live next to Louisiana for some reason. And then over on the left-hand side, there's not much out there.
That's just what I was going to say. And
Yeah.
up in the Panhandle, there's not much.
And obviously the
Certain
real estate
areas.
center, we watch these other markets. Now you see the exceptions. You see Lubbock and Amarillo and then Midland and Odessa down over there. And we watch the others, San Angelo and other markets, Wichita Falls. The growth is hard. This is universal around the world, but particularly in the United States and then more particularly in Texas. Growth is more urbanized. It is going to the big cities. It's going to the urban areas. And you can see the urban triangle of Texas is where 87% of the people in Texas live east of I-35 or along the I-35 corridor and east. And 2 out of 3 Texans live in that triangle that I just put up there.
2 out of 3, and therefore we have schools in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio.
You have to provide the services where the people are.
Where the people are. I think it's also interesting to see in the valley.
Yes.
Is that McAllen?
Laredo, McAllen.
Laredo and McAllen.
Right. Webb County's
They
Laredo
have
there, where 35 goes
increased.
down. And I extended into Mexico, which it really doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But that is the main highway coming up from Monterey up in through Laredo and so on. And of course, now we've got the Mexico-Canadian trade agreement put together.
That's right.
That's replacing NAFTA. But that trade flow coming up I-35 is going to continue coming through the Laredo as
That's another good chart for our agents around the state, because we have agents everywhere.
Mhm.
They take our online or live broadcast.
Right.
It's good for them to see when they're taking a listing, if they are taking it in one of those counties that lost population, that they can say, here's why it might take your house a little longer to sell.
It might. Now, if you're in some of these red counties, particularly near the triangle, you would think, now some of that's in the hill country where it's lightly populated, and the housing prices are so high that young people don't move there. But basically, it's not where the jobs are. So you don't get the young people. But they could be very appealing for the baby boomers who do want to move and retire and so forth. So you have to just target your market. El Paso, of course, is still doing well as well, too. Here's the projection for population for Texas. This is from the Texas State Data Center, which is our state demographer's office. They revised their projections last November, lowered them. Basically, they took the 2010 to 2015 rate, and the red line was the 2010. Incidentally, for all of the realtors out there, everybody out there, 2020, in addition to being a presidential election year I mentioned a minute ago, it is also a census year. This is the year for census count. Go out, get counted early and often.
Early and often?
Well, so much of the federal programs and so
Uh-huh.
forth, Texas, it looks like, is projected right now, I believe, to gain 3 congressional seats
Okay.
in Congress, which is,
That makes
that means
sense.
more power to the state. Obviously, even within the state, the distribution of the population is going to change so that our House of Representatives and legislature could change. So I point this out, be aware of it. You need to know it.
And
We
that
grew
goes
by
straight
about,
out to 2050.
this is
which
out to 2050, this is longer term.
Huge.
I really like doing 40-year projections because I really won't be here in 40 years to have to defend it. But we added about 14 million people the last 40 years. And the next 40 years, it looks like we're going to add somewhere between 22 and 30 million people. If we added
Incredible.
if we add 30 million people, which is the red line, incidentally, we'd add 27 million cars and trucks. And one of the
And
big
that's a
problems
little
we've got
frightening.
in Texas, the biggest, probably the number one problem we've got is going to be infrastructure.
Exactly.
And in that infrastructure category is going to be transportation, roads, public transit, all kinds of things. Not to mention water, not to mention schools that you mentioned earlier, but public goods and services. The public sector can't keep pace when you have 13.7% in 10-year growth, and you got almost 3 or 4 million, 5 million people come into the state. The public sector just can't generate, and particularly when you got a little depression in there, and public revenues go
So when
down.
people say, when is the construction on our roads going to stop? Never.
No, never.
And it
It
shouldn't.
won't stop. It can't.
It can't.
Not until we go to teleportation, and then you can beam me up, Scotty, kind of thing. But we're gonna have to
That was the
figure a way to
frown I
get
gave
people
you.
around. Texas is woefully behind in public transit. We don't have an effective
But we don't have an effective
intra-city.
rail at all.
No, well, I mean, we've got a little bit, but we don't have anything like what a major city needs to have. And that's a 100-year commitment. And most of our leadership won't make 100-year decisions. They won't make 20-year decisions because you got to get reelected every 2 years or 4 years. So it makes it difficult. This is a slide that I also like to show real estate agents. This is the age distribution in Texas right now, and I've labeled the age cohort groups: the Boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, which we generally refer to as the Millennials, and then Gen Z, which is the next group, and then the age group 0 to 19, 20 to 38, 39, 53.
We always love generational information.
We love the generational. Here's a couple of points that I would like to make. You can see out on the right-hand side, first of all, on the very far right-hand side, that 85 plus. If you want to know what's going to be a problem with Social Security, it's that chart. It's that graph.
That graph
It's
right
that
there?
line. Because the older people are living older. I'm one of the boomers. I'm right on the leading edge of the boomers. And we're living longer. We're putting more of a drain on Social Security and social services and housing needs and institutional needs for older people. So there's a category of real estate, old age homes and so forth. You can see those being more prolific now, and they're going to be even more so as the boomers are now crossing over the threshold of being over 70 and getting into their 70s and approaching their 80s. But you can also see the numbers. There's Gen X is almost the same number. And that was the fall-off generation. The generation that today is 39 to 43. Now this is as of 2018. So just move over for
Move
2 years.
everything over.
But Gen X came along. Those are the boomers and Gen X now are the homeowners who bought houses 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago and need to be churning out so that the millennials coming out that want to buy houses can buy if they can't find a new one. You'll see that the most prevalent age group is 26, 27, 28. Good news, bad news.
What's
For
the
this
bad
year,
news?
the bad news is 26, 27, 8, do they buy or rent?
Well, I would have thought that they are renting.
They're renting, they are. I mean, obviously there are always exceptions, but by and large, under 30,
Right.
you
I would
generally
think
figure
so.
are renters. And then once you hit more or less 30, and particularly as you approach mid and late 30s,
Mid-30s.
so here are the home buyers coming along. You can see them, but for the next 10 years, that wave, that demand wave is coming. As those 26, 27, 8 become 30, 31, 32, and then become 34, 35, 36. So the future is very good. Now there's a dip in there, and I can't explain the dip. I have no idea. I can tell you that our Gen Z in Texas out here is kind of interesting. If I showed you this same graph for the nationally, it would look very similar except for Gen Z. Gen Z at the national actually kind of tails off to the left. It's actually declining. In Texas, it's growing. So we're not only good for the next 10 years, we're good for the next 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
As that group comes through. Here's the challenge. I told you I was here last night with my grandson who's 7,
Uh-huh.
and I think about it and I say, okay, he's in that group. What is he going to do for a living when he's 37? I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do. My guess is he may have a job 30 years from now that doesn't even exist today. Just like people working
It's
today
very visionary.
have jobs that didn't exist 20, 30
prior.
years ago. And so
Exactly.
the challenge is, how do we educate him to be prepared for that job, whatever that job is? So our whole education is not only just building schools and physical facilities and so forth, it's
Very
what are we
future.
teaching, how are we preparing them to think, which is essentially what education is supposed to be about. That's my soapbox for the day. But you can see how, just sheer numbers, there's 8 million of them versus 7.8 million millennials. That's an even bigger
It's huge.
generational group coming
Coming
behind the
behind
millennials.
the millennials.
Now, right now, we're focused mostly on the millennials, and for the next year or two, that wave of particularly the 35 to 38 coming through there, and now we're even 2 years, we're down to 2020. This group is now, they're getting married finally, they're having families, they're having kids. Now they're going into home ownership. And I can tell you the home ownership rate with heads of households at 35 or under is going up. That was the big decline this last decade, was a big decline in that
was.
home ownership rate of that
Exactly.
age group. It has reversed itself and is coming back up.
More good news.
In terms of Texas for the next 50 years or next 40 years, here's where the projected growth is going by counties. There's still some counties that are not projected to grow at all. In fact, to actually continue to lose over the next 50 years. But again, it's the urban triangle that is garnering most of that growth. You can see McAllen is a little different. Amarillo, Lubbock, Midland are really growing. El Paso out in the west, and then in between.
And Beaumont.
And
area.
Beaumont, yeah.
Port Arthur.
It's not the dark blue, but it's the lighter blue. Right. And again, the urban triangle effect. If we look at, I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly just for everybody here who's watching in different parts of the state. Dallas-Fort Worth. Dallas-Fort Worth is going to be somewhere between 13 to 16 million people by 2050. Right today it's a little less than, it's about 7.6 million people in 2015. It's just incredible projections. Austin is projected to go to somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million people, from less than 2 million in 2010.
That's incredible.
San Antonio. San Antonio was with the only MSA of the major MSAs where the revised projection was actually greater than the prior projection. but somewhere between 4.3, 4.6. And incidentally, if you compare that back to Austin, Austin becomes bigger than San Antonio and crosses over here at some point.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And don't you believe at one point it's going to be like DFW? It's going to be Austin, San Antonio,
Oh, yeah.
just one
Oh, yeah.
metroplex.
Try driving down I-35 right now from
It
Austin to
is
San
already.
Antonio. You don't know where you are or anything else. And then finally, let's see, I gotta find the right place. Houston is projected to go to just shy of 15 million, 14.5 million people. It's just, the rate of increase on population here is remarkable. Texas is projected to continue. Now, will it be these nice straight lines and so forth? No. I mean, it'll move around a little bit, but over longer periods of time, it tends to even out a little bit. I know we're gonna run out of
We have
time here in a
about
minute.
2 minutes left.
Well, and we finally got to housing. For those of you watching, this is available on the Texas Realtors website. I think I took this one off of our recon. We put it out too. A little infographic. It gives you a one page. This
I
is
just
third
saw that
quarter.
one on Recon.
We'll have the fourth quarter of 2019 available probably within the next, actually by next week, I think. Because we'll close the books. Today's the 7th, isn't it?
Today is the 7th.
We close the books today. So we'll have the report out this afternoon and for tomorrow for December and then the end of the
That
year.
in itself is just a great bird's eye view.
Yeah,
Just
that's all,
bam,
exactly.
there's the information.
Exactly. The current median price and median price change and mortgage interest rate, days on the market, expectation, sales, permits, and so forth, months inventory. Now, this is statewide, so this is a statewide summary.
Exactly.
Total housing market 2019, we had almost 330,000 sales. Now, this again is through November, so by the time we add December in here, it's going to be close to about 350,000 sales for the year. Almost $100 billion worth of, and that's important for real estate agents. That's where your commissions come from. It's a dollar amount, and that was up 6%. Average price is up about 3%. Median was up about 3.5%. Price per square foot. We're leaning more toward looking at that price per square foot number as a real measure of what prices are doing generally than the average or the median, because averages and medians are affected by the month-to-month difference in which houses happen to sell that month, particularly the average. New listings, good news here is new listings were up about 3% for the year, which brought the month's inventory statewide up to 3.7, but anything less than 6.5 is still a very tight market.
Good market.
New home market was up, and these are new home sales that went through an MLS. Okay, because that's our source of data. We have access, so we do have new home sales. So we don't know exactly what percentage of the total new home market this represents, because we do know a lot of the big volume builders, for example, don't necessarily use the realtors. They have their own sales
They
force.
do. They
And-
don't
and
use MLS.
A lot of their people are licensed, but they are not necessarily, they're selling for the company. And the total dollar volume, average and median, you'll see are significantly above. You'll see, though, that the rates of increase is there because the home builders are trying to hit the sweet spot in the price points. They're not building the 750 to 800,000 to $1 million homes spec and going through a realtor much. They're trying to hit that price point between about 250 to 350, 400, somewhere in there, because that's the big demand.
It's going to sell quickly.
It'll sell quicker, and there's the bigger demand. Average price you see is $143 a foot versus the $132 on existing new listing, months inventory. And then Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth led the nation in residential permits and have for the last 6 years. Houston has been the leader for single family home construction for the last 5 years around the country.
Around
So
the
it's-
country.
it's
That
a
makes
lot.
me so proud.
Yeah.
It does.
But we're still nowhere near building the
Dallas,
maximum
Fort
number
Worth.
we built back in 2005 and 6. We're still 85, 70, 80% of that number.
But
I'll
does that
show you
keep
in a
our
minute.
demand
I'll
strong?
show you in a minute, yeah. The
Very
the housing market, the new home housing market has not recovered from the Great Recession. We're still not there. Annual
Sharp
home
saying.
sales in Texas, again, I want to do this as quickly as I can for those of you, just to give you some history. We've set a record every year for the last 8 years. It took us 9 years to recover from the Great Recession. You'll see we went from 2006 sales, and then by 2015, we balanced back out, came up again, and now ever since then, it's been not only a record from the previous year, but a record from the previous high year. From the decade 2010 to 2019, I did have, I guess, some end-of-year numbers for 2019. Sales are up almost 68%, average price is up 55%, and the median price up about 66%. That's the blue line and the red line running through there. Here's an interesting statistic, though. The home sales per 1,000 households is extremely interesting to see the pace of sales. And there's no real reason why that should necessarily increase that much. The 37.6 over there in 2006, which was the record year, that was the last year where basically, if you could fog a mirror, you got 110% financing. You didn't have to have a job. You didn't have, the craziness in the financial market allowed people to buy houses. Well, that's no longer the case. It's not as hard, but nevertheless. So we're seeing how that, and you can see back from 1990 to 2000, the average was about 20.8, and now it's about 30.6. So the housing market is churning, if you will, faster. But people are staying in place longer. It used to be a house would sell about every 5 to 7 years. Now it's about 9 to 12 years, and that's one of the reasons for our shortage. Again, our comparative median home prices in Texas. When we index the various states and then compare the rate of change in median home price, that's Texas up there at the top, leading the pack of all the other states and the U.S. But when you look at the actual dollar amount, that's Texas along the bottom, the orange line along the bottom. So we again are maintaining our somewhat competitive advantage of having lower priced housing just in general on the median, but we are kind of catching up to Florida and Arizona and some of the other
I
states.
was looking at that, very close to Florida.
Yeah, and in fact, at one point in time, we were right there even with Florida back in 9, 10, and 11. But you can see the big hump overs back over here in 05, 06, 07. Especially you can see it in California where it just fell off a cliff, home prices. You see that Texas didn't do that. We kind of flattened, but we never actually dropped. We were one of the few states that didn't actually have that big, the roller coaster effect, as you might describe it. Here's what's happening though in affordability. Home prices are going up faster than incomes. The red line is median price of a home in Texas, and the blue line is the indexed median household income. Last year.
Yeah, that's not as positive as we'd like it.
Now, when those lines start separating, or you get a bigger spread, as you see out there on the far right-hand side, it means that people are now paying, at least in 2018, I'll update this to 2019 when we have the data, but we're paying about 3.89, almost 3.9 times their household income to buy a house, as opposed to 2.65 back in '89.
Is there a particular slide that we need to see before we have to say goodbye? Because we're
running out.
We're running out.
I did want to show you this one. This is the distribution. We were talking about the shortage of homes, particularly in the sweet spot of 150 to 400. 2/3 of the sales in Texas happen between 150 and 400,000.
That is such information for builders. It's incredible.
Well, not only for builders, but for realtors.
Well,
this is all sales, so it's everybody. But look over there at the month's inventory. It's less than 3 for each of those categories. So it's really, really tight market. And the last one I'll leave you with, this is our projection for 20 and 21, for 19 and 20. Housing permits, we're projecting 10.3% increase statewide. Sales to go up 6% and prices per square foot to go up about 5%. And you can see the decimal points. Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, we have projections for the individual markets there. All of them are very positive. All of them are still looking very, very good. 2020 looks like a good year for us. We're going to be fine.
Yay! We just clapped hands there. Thank you, Dr. Gaines. Oh my goodness. I could sit here for the next hour and continue. I love charts, graphs, information, as our students do. And I told some of the offices that were watching today, it's going to be good positive stuff. So you can tell the agents in advance it's going to be really good positive information. And I love how energetic he is when he goes through the information we all need. So one more time, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And he and I talked about coming back mid-year so that we can get him back again.
We'll just see how wrong we are.
We'll see not how wrong,
Yeah.
how even better it is. And thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
We're so proud of the
Yeah.
Real Estate Center and all it does with great information for all of Texas. Next month, my interview will be two very well-known people, Chris Sears from Houston and Jennifer Welch, who's from the DFW area. They're going to tell you how they went from agent to owning their own particular company. And as well, Jennifer has a real interesting niche in that she finds and restores historical homes
okay.
and then flips them. So she's going to talk about how, in her search in that specialty, how it works with historical properties. So our new schedule is online, ready to go for 2020, and the catalogs will be out shortly. Don't forget, we have our great champions that are in our book, Successful Tendencies, you can buy in the front office or on Amazon. And we hope and believe you'll get so much good information that will help you with your career in 2020, your jump start, make more money, and then 30 Days to Success in Real Estate if you want to know how to get started day by day as a new agent. Those are both online as well as in our offices. So again, Dr. Gaines, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to our customers. Without your business, we don't have one. And I thank you all for being our valued customers and friends. We are as well looking for a few new teachers, especially on the appraisal, inspection, loan side. But if any of you have an interest in being an instructor, please send your resume to our HR Vice President, Debbie Blazes. It's just Debbie, D-E-B-I, at championschool.com. Thank you for your business and have a wonderful 2020.